Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Chapel in New York webinar, Navigating International Prospect Research. I am Arnaud Marcillassi, Head of International Fundraising at Chapel in New York. Today, we have two great speakers, Valentina Guerrini, Senior Director of our partner company, Altrata, and our Head of International Philanthropy, Heather Hill. Valentina, can you introduce yourself, please?
Gladly. Hello, everyone. Lovely to meet you. My name is Valentina. I represent Altrata, a research firm, so perfect for the discussion today. Our goal is to find who are the affluent individuals around the world to support the fundraising strategies of charities, universities, schools, and foundations around the world. So it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Valentina. Heather?
Yes, thank you, Arnaud. So as Arnaud said, I'm Heather Hill. I'm the head of international philanthropy for Chapel in New York. I've been working in the philanthropic sector for over 20 years now, both domestically in the US as well as internationally, working for a variety of universities, social benefit organizations, INGOs, and then with Chapel in New York, overseeing our global family foundations, as well as our charity management service. So just a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Heather. It's great to have you today. And it's really nice to have Valentina with us today. Prospect research is much more than a list of names. And I think you'll learn that if you don't already know it. Valentina and I are working right now on a great international fundraising campaign for the #1 business school in Brazil. And the work Altrata provided and still does is amazing. Before I give you the floor, Valentina, just a few words about Chapel in New York for those of you who don't know us yet. We've been around in the world for 25 years. We helped raise $1 billion with more than 450 clients. We have a unique team of 40 international fundraising experts all over the world, and I have the honor to lead this team. We have 6 umbrella foundations to help you with tax and legal issues when you want to raise funds abroad. US, Canada, UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. Now let's go with the show. Don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat. We'll ask the questions to our speakers. Valentina, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. So let me just share my screen and walk you through our approach to research at Altrata and what I've learned in the last 10 years. Working with organizations, both that are fundraising locally, but now, especially in the last 5 years, that big trend of fundraising internationally. How do we do it strategically? How do we do it so that we're maximizing our resources, which are ever more scarce? And how do we make sure that we're maximizing the capacity of the team? So a little bit of numbers just to give you some context as to how we're able to find this information and really know more about this landscape. As I mentioned, I represent Altrata. It's a relatively new brand. So if you haven't heard of it before, it's perfectly normal. It's a new name that was created, a new brand that was created roughly 2 years ago after 5 data businesses were acquired and brought together. Because in the world of data and the world of research, you're never done. It's constantly catching up and making sure that you're up to date with how the market is evolving. So we work predominantly with the philanthropic sector, and we're able to identify who are the change makers in the world that contribute to philanthropy. So we research through different types of methodology. A lot of it is hand-curated research through 600 analysts that work at Altrata. A lot of it is using algorithms, and some of it is using AI now, the big buzzword of the last years. And what this access to different sources, to different teams allows us to do is to uncover who are these individuals that contribute significantly to philanthropy, what are the trends that we're seeing in their giving, and really how are organizations able to engage them effectively? So again, you'll hear me talk a lot about being proactive and maximizing your efforts. So we are truly global organization. And what I thought would be interesting to start with is to describe this landscape briefly, right? Because the high net worth space, the major donor space, is very diverse depending on which market we're looking at. And so in the context of international fundraising, we really have to be aware of the cultural differences, the wealth differences that are across the various markets. So I'm a numbers person, so let me know, I don't want to bore you with statistics, but I just thought it would be good to bring a few numbers to the table coming from our recently released philanthropy report. If you're a numbers person like me and really want to go into the statistics, feel free to download these reports for free from our website. And what we're seeing that in 2022, the ultra high net worth giving accounted for 38% of global giving by individuals and was up 2% from previous year. So although it is challenging to fundraise through high net worth individuals, what we're seeing is that individuals are giving more. We just have to find the right way of engaging with them. So the goal of today is really to make sure that we're focusing our strategies and removing the noise that sometimes can come from this space. So the global view is that people are giving I would say 312 billion of that giving is coming from non-ultra high net worth, of course, mass fundraising playing a big role. But look at that huge piece of the pie, 189 billion coming from just ultra high net worth individuals. For us, ultra high net worth are those that have a net worth of 30 million plus. So they're contributing significantly. And you'll also hear me talk about the three areas of giving, which is the high net worth giving, but it also touches on foundation giving, and it also touches on corporate giving. In fact, the public foundation giving was 308 billion, so still very strong. But we'll see that this number is really changing, especially in the last years. Because we are looking at the world as a whole, interested to understand where these high net worth individuals are coming from. Historically, North America has been the strongest market in terms of high net worth giving, but look at those percentage growths coming from Europe and Asia. This is where I spend the bulk of my time within Europe and Asia, and really where we're seeing a huge push and investment towards high net worth giving. The willingness is there. It's just a different way of doing philanthropy. And what is really important in these markets is going via networks, being able to access these individuals via known relationships. And we're going to talk about that as well. Now, it's a little bit small, but I hope you can read this because it gives a bit of a perspective of the big economies from a high net worth perspective. So US, of course, number one, but we can see that population change is decreasing, minus 10%. What I get really excited about are the European and the Asian countries. So China is to be expected at number two, maybe a little bit of an outlier here because the philanthropic market is a bit challenging, but we are seeing a lot of good influence from Chinese donors in Singapore and Hong Kong, and how organizations are trying to capture those relationships. Germany is also very unique. It's at number three. It's a very wealthy market. However, individuals tend to be very private with their giving. So the traditional fundraising strategies don't work as well in Germany. We really have to focus much more on cultivation and upgrade of existing relationships. And we can talk about that as well. What I think is fascinating is Hong Kong, UK, Canada, France, Switzerland, Italy. I have to say this is really where most of the organizations I speak to are. But I'm also seeing a lot of international organizations. So organizations from the US fundraising in Europe, and organizations in Israel fundraising in Europe and in the US. So these are really target markets, both for the local efforts and also the international efforts. And I guess that's why we're here today. Now, I'll spend a few minutes on this slide because this is really dictated by what I've been seeing in terms of a shift in the last 5 to 10 years. When I started at Altrata 10 years ago, major donor fundraising was done predominantly by the larger organizations or by some small organizations that have very good networks. However, it was very reactive. It was reliant on the networks of a few that were bringing in contacts. It wasn't strategic. It was accounting for a small portion of that whole private sector income. And really, in the last 5, 10 years, especially in the last 5 in Europe, we've seen a huge boom in the way that organizations are investing in analytics, in research, to be able to get ahead of this sector and be able to navigate and control the narrative and be able to grow this major donor segment in a strategic manner. So what I've really seen is the move from a reactive to a proactive strategy. And the reason why we love talking about major donor fundraising is because it's not just siloed to individuals. It's because with the growth of major donor fundraising, and especially internationally, you have growth of your influence in the areas of foundation giving and corporate giving as well. The reason for that is that there's huge crossover. An individual that gives is also tied to foundation, is also tied to companies. And so when we're thinking of proactive strategy, we want to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities that lie from one single relationship that can give you access to more networks of influence. So when we think of successful fundraising, always think, what else can I get out of this relationship? What other doors can be opened? And with successful high net worth strategy, we can reach new successes in the areas of foundation giving and corporate giving as well. Curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. So feel free to shoot it in the chat. But we're going to see how we're also able to analyze the crossover between these 3 spheres. Now, on the private foundation side, we have studied how many of the individuals that are giving also have a private foundation. So 71% of the individuals that are giving with a net worth of 100 million plus have a foundation. Not always do they give via the foundation. They have their interest in other, or they might give directly as well. But the influence of the foundation crossover with the individual is pretty present. And there is a full chapter in the report about the archetype of donor that we're seeing giving at high level. Predominantly, age has a huge impact. Individuals that are 60 plus really give, of course, larger gifts. We're also seeing that, of course, it's more proportionally men. However, there is a huge rise of female philanthropists. And so when we're thinking about what does your message communicate to, we want to be able to find donor archetypes that mirror the type of messaging that you're sharing. One thing that has not made an impact is the source of wealth. I was surprised. I would think that self-made individuals would be giving more. It's not the case. They might be giving to different causes, but what we're really seeing is a huge effort towards new generation of high net worth individuals, which are often not very easy to capture, but we are looking at one of the greatest transfer of wealth in the last decades. And so if we're able to monitor family relationships, we're also able to capture individuals that are fairly young that are going to inherit a lot of wealth. So that's a little bit of seed planning for the future. When you're thinking of the ideal donor, the donor archetype, also looking into that generational wealth transfer can play a huge impact for future strategy as well. Now, let's get into it. We've clearly seen that there is a lot of appetite for high net worth giving. The market is shifting in the direction of accommodating that. There's more giving from high net worth individuals. Individuals are more global. There is the rise of high net worth individuals in different economies, and they're more culturally, philanthropically minded. So how do we capture that? As an organization, to be able to be effective in your fundraising strategies, we want to make sure, and you'll hear me mention this a lot, is that you're optimizing your efforts and your time. So I like to think of the concept of a funneling system. A funneling system is there to make sure that we're focusing on quality of prospects over quantity of opportunities. Because when you're thinking of fundraising internationally, there's a lot of directions in which you can turn. That is dangerous because it could lead to a lot of wasted resources, a lot of time wasted, and a lot of lost investments in events that maybe weren't the right fit. So let's think about this strategically. I like to grow a strategy based on the successes of the organization. So a success of one organization is clearly different from another, but generally think of this funneling system. We want to start from who you know, who you've been successful in attracting, who you have within your database. And then from there, we're going to start narrowing down the list based on certain scores. How engaged an individual is with you, how wealthy an individual is, how philanthropic are they? Are they giving at a certain gift size? Are they giving in certain causes? And this can be applied both to your local and national efforts, but also international. And so we're going to look at ways where this funneling system can be created, and what are the things that you have to look at to be able to map out your international opportunities. The goal is to create a top prospect list, manageable top prospect list. Really, we're not in the business of volume. We're wanting to find 50 to 200 people that meet the right criteria to then be moved into the moves management approach done by the fundraising team. So it's a manageable prospecting pipeline. You can really spend time cultivating the prospect. You have an idea of how to engage with them because we're looking at networks as well. And so the end goal is this time-saving aspect. This is where research comes into play. It's the strategic partner to be able to focus your attention. Now, when we talk about prospect research and fundraising, predominantly, there's 5 different areas in which I would say we spend the bulk of our time. I like to think of the idea of prospecting, especially internationally, as similar to the concept of concentric circles. As we said, first we look within, then we look 1 degree of separation. Do I have anyone that I'm indirectly connected to that could bring value? And then if that's exhausted, I look externally. Externally in the market, who are the individuals that would be perfect for this type of campaign that I need to target? So if we start with the donor qualification, we talked a little bit earlier about that funneling system. Now, essentially, it's being able to add metrics and scores to your existing network and database to be able to filter out the best prospects. That being said, it's not for everyone, right? We sometimes see some organizations that just don't have that pipeline, just don't have that network. They have to build it off fresh. So don't worry, we will get to that as well. That's the external network that you will, or the external prospecting that you will do. We just want to exhaust, if you do have some existing opportunities, we want to look at them first. Now, I thought it would be interesting to share this because the reason why it's important to think of exhausting your network also in the context of international fundraising is because these individuals are increasingly more global. So often I've had conversation where an organization might want to access North America. They want to start fundraising in North America because it's a more mature market from a philanthropic perspective. And they just think it would be easier. And what they do is they want a rich list of all the people in the US that are giving to environmental causes, for example. We can do that, absolutely. But I always ask them, what about who is already giving to you? Have you looked at them first? Oh, no, they're just based in my market. You would be shocked to see the influence that people at this level have in the markets that you're interested in. So just for example, I ran some metrics from the database, and individuals that are based in France that have a second home in Switzerland, 44%. Individuals that are based in France and have a second home in London, 14%. Individuals in the Netherlands that have a second home in Dubai, 20%. These individuals are extremely global. They have influence. They go across borders. So let's capture that. Don't look externally if you can look internally first. That's the key message I want to share. So when you're doing that database qualification, have you evaluated the global footprint of these individuals? Have you looked at all your major donor first? Have you seen if they sit on international boards? Have you seen if they run companies with HQs in other countries? Have you looked at where the foundation is HQ'd? All these little steps will allow you to generate warmer prospects and warmer leads. They might not be able to give internationally, but they will be an introducer to an international network. So we want to exhaust that first. When we analyze networks, what is a network first and foremost? It's anyone that could be introduced. It could be a business partner. It could be an individual, of course, that sits on the same board. It could be a friend, a social connection. It could be a family relationship. It could be a colleague or an industry colleague as well. And when we look at the metrics on networks, the average trustee in the US has, for example, at least 20 direct professional and personal connections to ultra wealthy. High net worth individuals are closer than you think if you're just able to ask the right people for the right introductions. Probably about 5-6 years ago, it wasn't easy to do this. It was very much reliant on the networks of a few. Now there's just so much information that we're able to collect and put together in order to create that mapping so that you can have a focused engagement strategy. One of the things that we do is when we think of networks is we want to surface the best opportunities. We can look at it one by one. So we can look at an individual, see who they're connected to, but that's not really the best approach. The best approach is looking at all the ambassador network, volunteers, major donors, trustees, the strengths of your relationships in a list, looking at all the people that you wish to target that we've built through this research effort, and then seeing what the overlap is between the two. In the space of really what has now become just a few minutes, we're able to surface top 10, top 20 connections that might have flown under the radar that are your way in to your international networks via your existing connections that you probably didn't even think of. That's really the power of research nowadays. Let me just, oh, this is completely, there's a little kick to it. I didn't even build this motion. I don't know why it's there, but nice. One of the things that, for the ones that know me already, but you'll hear me talk a lot about is the balance of power. Whenever we talk about network mapping or networking, there are some challenges in giving too much power to the ambassador network. That is where fundraisers rely on these networks, whether it be an advisory board, a development board, an event committee, whatever it might be. And they rely too much on their power to make introductions. And I've seen very often fundraisers ask, hey, who can you introduce us to? That's the old school way of doing fundraising or getting access to networks. What we want to reinvent is via research, be able to go to an individual and say, I saw you might be connected to this individual. Did you know they just gave in this area a gift of this size, or they just, or they have a foundation that operates in this space? Do you are you close to that person? Can you bring them to an event? It's impossible for a board member or an ambassador to say no to something so specific. Why? Because you're communicating the value of that interaction. You're communicating the value that they will bring in bringing that person along. And you're making them understand that you're bringing value to that individual, right? Because that's your area of philanthropy is their area of interest. A specific ask will get you way further than just list of names that are brought up to a network of ambassadors. Again, this was impossible in the past, now it is. So think strategically of how you maximize your time. And so what we're doing is we're taking back power. The fundraising team has power in asking for these specific introductions and asking for targeted referral. That's meant to be a skill. We're tipping the balance of power. So what we're really wanting to do is measure and control the outcome of that conversation. Now, a quick case study here, because one of the things that we talked about with network mapping has been peer-to-peer relationships, right? So you might have a board member, an ambassador network, and you want to understand who they're connected to. You're able to research them and see how many of the people in their network are in a specific market, if they're philanthropic, if they're wealthy, if they have a foundation. These are all kind of the data points that are at your disposal. But let's not discount the power of corporate networks, as we mentioned as the beginning. We were working with a UK NGO that had great success with corporate partnerships and wanted to, did have some major donors in the UK, but they were branching out in the US and they were creating a friends of in the US. They really started by looking at their network of donors and going to them and asking them for introductions to philanthropists in the US in specific cities that their head of development was going to visit. So they set up some meetings there. And then they also saw that the people that were visiting were, some of them were founders of companies, and these companies were very philanthropic, giving to organizations in the similar space. So from one interaction, they were able to access 3 more prospects, 2 that were in potential major gifts, individual giving, and 1 that was a corporate potential gift. So again, it was very targeted. It was 1 trip, and it probably took just about 2 weeks to get all that information ready. Again, very strategic in how they made those asks and those requests for introduction. Now, let's get to the third use case, which is, let's say I'm an organization that doesn't have a lot of strengths within. I don't have a very powerful network. I don't have history of engaged boards or trustees, whatever it might be. I need to look externally. How do we go about this? Let me say that if we're looking at the US market, it's very different from the rest of the world. In the US, there's so much information on giving and on wealth. So what we're able to do is, okay, we can create a list of prospects that are candidates that have history of giving at a certain level, are philanthropic in a certain area. And then it's a cold approach of being able to try and access them. So when we talk about a cold approach, let's say there are no common networks, we try and build those networks. We look at the decision makers within the foundation. We look at the gatekeepers of the individual. And the goal here is really being able, once again, to not have a long list of people, but 50 individuals for each fundraiser that they can build relationships with. If we're looking outside of the US, Europe and Asia, luckily, once again, in the last 5 years, there's more information on giving, but we will never have the granularity of giving amounts, for example. UK is a bit of an exception, Australia as well. But for markets in continental Europe and in Asia, it's rare to really find out gift size unless they're enormous gifts. So then we got to get creative. We might not be able to look for giving amounts, but we might be able to assess affiliations. What did they study? Any quotes that we are able to find, anything that will build what we call the prospect hypothesis. So the first thing that we ask, and we've talked to Chapel New York about this as well, what is the prospect hypothesis of that organization? Who are they trying to target? And it could be maybe someone that comes from the diaspora community. So looking at individuals that were born in a certain country and are residing in another. Maybe individuals that come from a particular industry. Be very specific in the people that you're looking for. So once again, you're creating a very targeted list of individuals that are in some ways easier to engage. Now, on the philanthropy section, this is just an example of the type of research that we put together on the dossier. This was an international individual. We can see here ties to the US. So we have donation amounts of 1,000. That will likely never happen in parts of Europe. But you can see here it's quite a diverse giving history between 1,000 and even, 3.4 million. An individual that might be giving privately or via the foundation. So really making sure that you're able to capture all this information. Final thing, when we're not talking about individuals of ultra high net worth, potentially it's also individuals that are not at that level, but are very influential, have a lot of influence. It's the third time today I have to say that word and it just does not come out. Let's think about potentially the C-suite. Individuals that are C-suite, senior managers, senior lawyers. We've done this type of research as well. If you're looking for more introducers, maybe less major gifts prospect, but maybe people within a certain geography that can give you access to new networks. This is particularly crucial, I would say, for parts of Asia and Europe. So again, thinking creatively at the type of people that you approach. And then finally, being able to search based on affinity. This was a project done with a UN agency in the environmental space. Being able to find people that have been giving to various type of areas. So we search by keyword. We can get very creative with the keywords, being able to find individuals that have been giving to climate, both within philanthropy, but maybe also tied to organizations that are in the climate space. So again, it's not just about the philanthropy, it's also about the affiliations. 30 minutes, I don't know, how did I do?
You did fabulous. And I've learned things. I'm supposed to know everything. I've learned things. It was super interesting. Particularly, I've learned that 44% of France's ultra high net worth individuals have a second home in Switzerland. I know that a lot of them had, but not as much. So that was great. Again, people, you can ask questions in the chat and we'll ask the question to the speakers. Maybe until we get questions, Heather, do you want to take the floor?
Thank you, Arnaud. Yes, I'd be happy to. And again, as Arnaud said, if you have questions, just pop them in the chat. We're happy to answer those. But I thought I'd speak a little bit about once you've done your research, you've got your strategy, you're engaging your donors, how do you actually bring the funds across borders? How do you get those donations back home? As you probably know or can guess, it's a complicated legal and regulatory environment. If your donors aren't interested in a tax benefit, then it's easy. They can just make their gift directly to you and you don't have to worry about it. But typically, if you're talking about major gifts, and especially with high net worth individuals, they're going to want that tax benefit. They're giving a substantial amount. They'd like to have the tax benefit offered. So how do you do that? Well, there are a few different ways. You could set up a separate legal entity in that country where your donors are. So this is something I would only recommend if you're planning on a long-term investment in that region. So you plan on being there multiple years, you want to have an active physical presence in country. And the reason I say this is that setting up a separate legal entity in a different country is an investment of time. It's an investment of financial resources. And you have to really source the expertise as well. So I'm guessing for a number of you on the call today that you don't have one person dedicated solely to international fundraising, especially someone solely dedicated to international fundraising in only one particular country if you are doing international work. That means you've got to find experts who can help you in navigating the legal and regulatory environment in that country, to even begin to know what to do to set up a separate legal entity there. And then once you've got kind of an idea of what you need, then you've actually got to go through the setup. You've got to do the different filings. You've got to pull the different documents together that you might need. In addition, you'll have to be thinking about the administrative aspects of having that entity in a different country, the banking, the accounting, the donation processing, setting up the portals for donors to be able to give to you. You'll have to have a separate board. Do you have individuals in that country who can serve on your board? Who's going to draw up things like the bylaws? A variety of factors to consider. It can be very effective if you know you're going to be working in that country for the long term. It gives you a lot of autonomy and agency as far as being able to really be active and hands-on in what's happening in country. But again, it is quite an investment of time and financial resource to maintain that. You may need to source help with that. There are organizations that can help with the setup, and then organizations that can help with management in different countries. Chapel New York's one of those. You might also be able to work with the law firm or have a kind of a patchwork of different experts for the different things you need. But again, that's really something I would only recommend thinking about if you're planning on a long-term presence in that other country. The other option that's available is working with an intermediary in country. So this is working with an organization that's already a registered charity in country. That means they've done all the legal and regulatory work ahead of time. They're handling all the administration, all the back office pieces of the gift processing, of the administration, of the banking. So finding a partner that is a registered charity means that donors who give to your intermediary partner will receive a tax benefit on their gift without you having to set up a separate legal entity. It's a lot less of a burden as far as the time that you need to put into it, the administration required of you. It frees you up to focus on what you're really concerned about, which is the actual fundraising in that country, as well as the donor relations and stewardship aspects of what you're doing. So the intermediary essentially would bear the legal regulatory burdens, ensure that everything is being done in a compliant manner. They would receive gifts from your donors. They would issue the tax receipts, provide any necessary documentation your donors might need, as well as alerting you to the donations you're receiving. And then that intermediary partner could grant the funds to you. So you want to make sure whoever you're working with as an intermediary is equipped with the proper structures and systems, that if they're granting funds to you, everything's being done in a manner that's compliant with cross-border giving. That way your donor's tax benefit doesn't fall into jeopardy and you don't have any other obligations that you need to worry about. So do your homework as you're looking at potential intermediary partners. But again, this is a much more efficient way, both in financial cost and your time. And there are organizations that do this. Chapel New York, again, is one. There's also King Badawin Foundation, CAF. There are different options out there, but look and see what makes the most sense for you. So again, this is a great option if you're looking to do something that's more of a time-bound initiative. So if you're doing a particular campaign or special fundraising initiative in country, but you're not sure how long you'll be there, working with the intermediary is a great solution. It's also a great option if you've got some donors, you want to be engaged with them, but having an actual physical entity in country is not so much of a concern. The donors are comfortable with you working through the intermediary partner, then it's a great option. You may encounter some donors who will push, why don't you have your own entity here? And I think that provides a space for conversation. I don't think the tail should wag the dog in these cases where a donor is dictating what your presence in country should be. what that donor is really expressing is, how can I have confidence that my gift will make it to you and be used in the manner in which I wish it to be used? So again, it's an opportunity for conversation to explain the relationship and partnerships, perhaps look at other ways you can provide those assurances to your donor. So as you're doing your research, get to the point of engagement, and you're thinking about different ways to actually receive the funds across borders. Again, you can look at no tax benefits offered, you can look at setting up your own separate legal entity and country, or you can look at working with an intermediary. So those are just some options available to you, and we're happy to be a resource as far as answering any questions about that. That is Chapel New York's area of expertise. We're the home of international fundraising and philanthropy. So feel free to reach out to us anytime if we can provide our counsel to you.
Thank you very much, Heather. We have questions about Africa. We at Chapel New York actually have 2 clients in doing international fundraising in Africa, but it's not universities, it's environmental organization and arts and culture. But there's a question about what would you say if the best way for African university, what would you say, sorry, is the best way for African universities to create affinity and engagement with ultra net worth individuals in the global philanthropy marketplace? And would you have insight on Africa as a region? Valentina?
Yes, happy to take that. We have a report of the global landscape of high net worth individuals where Africa has been mentioned as well with all the statistics. So I'll put the link in the chat and you can access that report. But when we're thinking about university engagement, there's generally 2 avenues. One is alumni and one is non-alumni. On the alumni side, we just have to make sure that there are individuals that are affluent, maybe people that have made their success in Africa and abroad. And so what we look within that database to see if there's any individuals of high capacity that maybe our entrepreneurs have made their success and they owe it to their education. That's the first target audience. And then if the alumni network is not showcasing a lot of value, then we have to look externally. And externally, I would say that most of the giving in Africa comes from abroad as we analyze it. And so the questions to ask are, what are the projects that you're fundraising for? And what is the ideal audience for that? What type of, as we said before, what's the prospecting hypothesis? Who would it appeal to? What type of profile would this be more attractive to? And then the goal is to look within the international landscape and narrow it down to a few geographies where we're able to find those individuals that meet that type of profile. So it could be industry of operation, it could be foundation giving into a certain area. So we really have to ask the question back to you, what is your case for support, and who will it target ideally?
Thank you. We have a question about, do you have similar reports for high network individuals in Latin America? And there's a similar question about Asia. What is it exactly? Sorry.
From Angel Marie. Yeah, I met you case 2 weeks ago. Nice to see you again. So let me just read it out loud. Asia Pacific is a highly diverse economic region. Yeah. Are there any industries with a particular high amount of charitable givers? On the corporate giving front, I would say it really depends. Most of the success of the fundraising or how much people give is dictated by their own liquidity events and how the companies are doing in the stock market. So I wouldn't narrow it down to a few specific industries. COVID was a little bit of an outlier. During COVID, there definitely were some industries that were doing better than other. And so a lot of the prospect research that we were doing was surrounding around those industries. But nowadays, it's highly dependent on the performance of these companies and the single performance of the individual. So one thing that we had to add because of this is we now have have news alerts, which we call 360-degree alerts, where we're able to track the success of companies and individuals. And if we're seeing a trend where there's multiple companies and individuals in the same industry that are having success, they have a lot of liquidity events, that have more disposable assets, then we can create a model where we're trying to find other individuals in that space. So there isn't one answer. I guess it really depends on how the economy is going.
Thank you. There's a question, is there a way to do wealth screening on potential donors living internationally?
Yes, absolutely. And that's really something that we were able to crack after probably 8 years of working on it. It's not easy. So yes, in the US, there's more information on affluent individuals. Now, after 8 years of gathering this information, we have a truly international database. So we have 4 million high net worth individuals around the world, evenly split across all the major economies. So we're doing a ton of screenings, especially lately in Australia, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, and of course, Europe, I would say, has been a big one. Africa can be challenging at times. We would have to see which parts of Africa. And Latin America is really the up and coming of the next 2-5 years. We're doing a lot of work in Brazil at the moment, as Arnaud alluded to at the beginning, Argentina and Central America as well. There's some parts of the world where it's still pretty challenging. For example, Japan. I'll always be transparent. Japan is a tough cookie to crack. We'll never be able to do well screenings in Japan, despite it being a very big economy, but all the other major ones, there's been a lot of success in well screenings.
Thank you very much, Valentina. We're coming to the end of our webinar. I have no more questions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Valentina. It was a great presentation. Thank you, Heather. Please get in touch with me if you want to discuss international fundraising projects. My email is in the chat. We will keep you posted on our next events, and we will have next events. We do a lot of events about international fundraising. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.